which we did. So, I mean, that came as a bit of luck, really. It was never scripted. It works out very well in the film, doesn't it?
I suppose you realize this is private property.
Sorry we hurt your field, mister.
In our price bracket, we didn't even think about color. The difficulties that there would have been in making that film in color were not even worth considering, and none of us felt that it was necessary. Our problem was that we shot for 7 weeks, which meant that we had 3.5 weeks to edit the film, get the music track together, dub it, and get prints for the cinema. And that's a very short period of time.
Our picture was called Beatles #1 because we didn't have a title, and I was getting these phone calls from United Artists in New York. Publicity people said, what are we going to call this film? We're putting out the advertising. I said, I don't know, we'll come up with something. And I was bugging them all, and the director and the writer, and saying, come on, you guys, come up with a title. And we couldn't come up with anything. John and I were just chatting. He asked me if I ever heard Ringo misuse the English language, and I said, well, give me an example. He said, well, if we were working hard at a recording session all night, the next day he would say something like, boy, that was a hard day's night. And when you think about it, it's a very interesting statement. And I said, John, that's a good title for our movie. And he said, I think so. So we went over and asked the director how he felt and the other Beatles, and they all said, fine, great, great. I think they just wanted to be relieved not to have to think of anything anymore. And I telephoned New York, the publicity people at United Artists, and I said, here's your title, A Hard Day's Night. And they said, what? And I said, don't give me an answer. Ask the secretaries, call me tomorrow. And the next day they called me and said, everybody loved the title. So now we had a title. And then it dawned on me, we didn't have a title song. And we had recorded everything. And you know, in filmmaking, you pre-record the songs, and then you photograph the singers singing to their own tracks. So I said to John one night, John, I think we're going to have a song called A Hard Day's Night. He said, what are you talking about? I said, what kind of a producer would I be to have a movie called A Hard Day's Night with the Beatles and not have a Beatles song called A Hard Day's Night? Please, you'll have to write a song. The next morning, he and Paul called me into their dressing room, we were still shooting, and played and sang to me the song A Hard Day's Night. Now, think about this. I got a hit song on demand. That's almost impossible. It was one of their biggest hits.
When I was asked to do the poster for the film, they saw some material that the United Artists New York Publicity Office presented in London, and they didn't like it. Walter didn't like it, Dick didn't like it, Peter didn't like it, because it was sort of cartoons with wigs, and I didn't feel that reflected what the Beatles really were. So Walter said, well, look, can you come up with anything? So I said, what about doing a sequence of photographs of each individual so that there's a feeling of animation from each individual Beatle? And I was very happy with the result, both of the poster and of the end credits. So we used very simple techniques to get something that I think was graphically effective.
Out of kindness, because we only had a few days before we had it in the cinema, we showed it to the executives who flew in. One of them did say, as you knew they would say, it's fine, but we have to revoice the voices because nobody will understand them. That was absolute truth, and most of them agreed with it.
We've become a limited company.
And I threw a fit. And so it didn't happen. Whenever you make a film and you show it to strangers for the first time, you are apprehensive. And it was silent, and it was a smaller cinema in London. And I was sitting next to a person who I didn't know, and the first reel goes on, and they're on the train, and I hear, and on my right is my editor, and I think, yeah, John, I think it is going on a bit too long there. You know, I think maybe we can cut a bit out of there, because you know. And the next reel goes on, and something happens, and she goes, maybe we could cut a verse out of that song and reduce it, because, you know. Well, it went on for 9 reels. At the end of it, the lights went up, and this woman turned to me and said, oh, Mr. Lester, that movie of yours. That was her high praise. So I said to John, well, you know, throw that away, guys. Forget about it.
I can very clearly remember the first time the film was screened in the United States.
The top management of United Artists, Krim Benjamin and the two pickers, were in Los Angeles. There was a dinner being given at the home of Harold Mirisch. And Harold Mirisch was a producer of repute. And he had invited the power core of United Artists Hollywood established group. Billy Wilder and John Sturgis and Blake Edwards and who else. And I told Arthur Krim, the print of Hard Day's Night is here. And Harold Mirisch was in the room. So Harold said, well, why don't you screen at my house after dinner? I said, Harold, we're not going to screen this picture the first time in America after dinner with Billy Wilder. And yes, it'll be great. Don't worry about it. You know, these guys know their movies. Bottom line is, we have the dinner, couches are turned around, and the Otrillo or the Picasso goes up into the ceiling, and we screen Hard Day's Night. It was not a long movie. I don't remember exactly how long, but it was not a long movie. And this very exotic movie is on the screen. And it ends. And there's utter silence. Nobody knows what to say because they've never seen a movie like this. And Bob Benjamin, who was Arthur's other half, Arthur Krim's other half, wonderfully soft-spoken, dear man, turns around to me and he said, I don't know what that was about, but I think we're going to make a lot of money. And that was the first screening of Hard Day's Night in the United States.
Johnny Jimson cut the picture as we went. And when it was finished, I mean, UA was screaming for Prince because, you know, by then it was all out that the Beatles were great.
In between the shooting of the movie and the actual premiere, which I think was in July, there was a myriad of different stories about the Beatles. The Beatles were in the papers every day because don't forget that by now there had been an outbreak, an epidemic of Beatlemania in America as well as here, and in Australia and on the continent. So the thing had gone global. The slightest thing that happened made enormous headlines. There were twin premieres for the movie in, of course, in Liverpool. It had to be in Liverpool and a West End of London. And it wasn't any great surprise that the media covered that to saturation. And it wasn't any great surprise to find that the fans turned out in amazing numbers, blocked the traffic in London's West End, blocked the traffic outside the Odeon Theatre in Liverpool. But what was a very pleasant surprise to all of us was that the film critics, the more serious film critics, as well as the kind of music writers, the pop writers, the rock journalists, that the serious film critics took the film seriously and began to talk in terms of the actual film value.
We had a screening in Liverpool, and I had a chat with Paul before, and he was very nervous about going to Liverpool. And I said, they're going to love it. They're going to love you. They're going to love the movie. And he said, we haven't been up there since we made it. And they may resent the fact that we're coming home so successful. And the others were worried about it. Somehow or other, they felt that their people would resent their success. And of course, they just loved them when they got there. It was almost impossible for me to predict the audience reaction to this movie. The Beatles had screaming fans whenever they performed in a concert. But that was in response to a live performance. And I didn't realize that the fans would respond the same way to them on film. But an early clue to the amount of enthusiasm from Beatle fans was the night of the performance for Princess Margaret in Piccadilly Circus, when there were thousands and thousands of people. And I was told it was like VE Day. And obviously, when royalty attends a premiere of a film, there's a lot of protocol. It was such an exciting, happy period.
It was a wonderful premiere. People came, they shouted. We had worked very carefully that it was very important that the opening of the film would be that one chord, and then out of the blackness came them running down the street. And at the premiere, they had the mighty Wurlitzer organ of the London Pavilion, and a guy rose up and played Beatles hits on the mighty Wurlitzer organ, at which point the lights in the cinema dimmed, and the film is about to start, but he hadn't finished his song, so they took the sound off the film, so the There was no chord, and people started running while he was still finishing off a few songs, and then slowly he descended, smiling and waving. So, you know, it started off well.
I think everybody was just kind of stunned by it because it was such an anti-Hollywood type movie. I mean, they didn't know Dick Lester really, and the style of this movie, the talking into the camera, the whole thing about it, the irreverence of it, all of it, and these kids themselves, who they'd heard of, obviously, was kind of stunned them because the movie is really a very unusual experience, and certainly breaks every rule that, you know, even the best of the Hollywood movies followed. Nobody disliked it, but nobody had expected what they saw.
Come here, you lot. Try to act with a bit of decorum. This is a posh place. We know how to behave. We've had lessons.
I'm sorry, sir. Members and invited guests only.
Aye, well,
Oh, yes.
It was a happy film. Everybody enjoyed it, even mums and dads. And there were a couple of Academy Award nominations. One was for Alan Owen, most deservedly, because he wrote the original script. The other was for me, rather undeservedly. But I was given an Academy Award nomination for my work in directing the music.
There was such an aura about them, and they had such an impact on everyone's lives that I think the exuberance just carried us on. And I was just lucky to be part of it. And because of it, I was sent a parchment scroll, which, I think you know the story, I was told that I was the father of MTV, and I wrote back and demanded a blood test.
Hard Day's Night is simply a classic example of what happens when enlightened management gives brilliant talent the ability to create.
I think the film actually widened the horizons of the Beatles. I mean, they'd been very successful from their small beginnings. They'd really conquered the world by this time. But the film set the seal on it because it brought them a wider audience, it brought them a wider range of ages, and made everyone realize that these weren't just fly-by-nights. They were great talents.